The Adventure of the Beggars. Our hearts they are stout, and our bows they are good, as well their masters know. They're culled in the forest of merry Sherwood, and never will spare a foe. After Robin's adventure with the butcher, Gilbert of the White Hand, and his trick played on the Sheriff of Nottingham, Little John professed himself to be jealous. I must change clothes with somebody, he said, and go into Nottingham and beard Master Sheriff. Robin Hood must not be the only man who has dared to do it. Robin laughed. I would scarcely risk it again without good cause. One does not put one's head into a lion's mouth twice over. I escaped scatheless, but you may not. Little John, however, was determined, and one day when he and Robin were walking through the forest together, the chance came to him. There were in those days a great many beggars wandering about the country, and they were not always either too old or too maimed to work. Often, indeed, they were lazy ruffians who, if they could not get what they wanted by begging, turned as readily to force or even murder. Such a beggar as this Robin and John saw striding along the road, waving a great staff in his hand and singing merrily. He was strangely dressed in ragged clothes, but so many folds of these that they would have kept out any weather. His hat was of the same kind, 3 old hats stuffed into each other and stuck together, and round his neck hung a great leather bag. There's your man, said Robin. Go and change clothes with him, Little John, and I'll warrant the sheriff will never know you. The very thought had already come to me, said Little John. Stay you here, good master, and see the sport. So Little John ran down onto the road and stood in front of the beggar. Tarry, tarry, cried he. Indeed, you must tarry. Not I, answered the beggar. It grows late. It's far to my lodging, and I'll look a fool if I get there to find all the supper finished. Ah, said Little John, I see that you think only of your own supper. But what about me? I have gone without a meal all this day. Will you not help me to my supper ere you hasten to yours? A likely thing indeed, scoffed the beggar. I have no more than the 1 penny which will purchase mine. Then give me that, cried Little John. By the mass, answered the beggar, I'll give you more than that. I'll give you the biggest thrashing you ever had in your life. With that, he threw off his cloak and bag and made for Little John with his quarterstaff lifted. So they fought, striking each other many shrewd blows, while Robin sat hidden on the hillside and watched. Presently he saw the beggar knock Little John to the ground, and he hastily fitted an arrow to his bow and waited to see what would happen. Ha, ha, my fine fellow, jeered the beggar. You'd take the last penny from a poor man, would you? I'll show you what it's like to be a beggar. With that, he stripped off Little John's fine doublet, hose, hood, and cloak, and put them on in place of his own ragged gown and 3-piece hat, took up his bag once more, put Little John's purse into it, and set off up the road, laughing to himself, while Little John sat up slowly and looked ruefully after him. Farewell, Beggar John, laughed Robin as he came down the hill. There, you have your disguise. Highway to Nottingham, and call on the sheriff. By the rood, said Little John, rubbing his head, I seem to have lost the first round, but I'll wager you, good master, that I'll bring back better gains as a beggar than ever you would. Done, laughed Robin. Now I'll hasten after your friend there and see what he has in his bag. Away went Robin at his best pace, and very soon caught up with the beggar. Not so fast there, shouted Robin. Stand still a minute while I come and break your head as you have broken my companion's. I'm always ready to give alms of that sort, answered the beggar cheerfully, and when I've thrashed you, I'll have a change of fine clothes, just like any squire in the country. To it they went with their staves, but this time it was the beggar who went down, while Robin stood victorious over him, drawing his hunting knife as he did so. Ah, spare me, cried the beggar. Be good to me. What will you gain by butchering so poor a wretch as I? I fought in my own defense and only punished your friend as I thought proper for his presumption. Look you, good sir, I have 100 pounds hidden in my bag, and all that will I pay you for my life. So, said Robin, sheathing his knife, a beggar has more than a penny to bless himself with. Well, my fine fellow, let me see the color of your gold. Right willingly, answered the beggar, and with that he opened the great bag and drew from it a cloak, which he spread upon the ground. He put his hand into the bag again, and Robin bent down to see what he would take out, the brisk wind ruffling his hair as he did so. The beggar moved round a little so as to get the wind behind him, and then he suddenly pulled out a great handful of finely ground meal and flung it into Robin's face. Robin was quite blinded for the moment and could do nothing but cough and rub his eyes. And while he did so, the beggar snatched up his staff and laid him out with a good blow on the back of his head. Then he stripped off Robin's cloak, hood, and doublet, took his purse also, crammed them into his bag, and set off again, laughing heartily at his own cleverness. Little John, now dressed as a beggar, came along the road just as Robin sat up and looked about him. "We're equal now, good master," he said with a grin. "Yonder beggar has left you his second coat, and you have your hose. Now I'm off to see what I can win back from this fellow." "This day is not over yet," gasped Robin. "I may still bring the biggest booty to the tri-sting tree." He got slowly to his feet after Little John had left him and put on the beggar's second coat, which happened to be a better one than the strange ragged garment which Little John was wearing. Then he went back to the hillside where he had left his bow, his quiver of arrows, and his horn. Robin stowed away the arrows under his coat, unstrung the bow which he could then use as a staff, and set off by the shortest forest paths toward Nottingham. He was well enough disguised, for his hair and beard were now all matted and tangled with blood and caked meal, and he had one black eye. Through the wood he went, and at length he came to the edge of the forest, where great open meadows sloped down to the walls of Nottingham. Here he found a large gathering of people, who had evidently flocked out from the city to see a hanging, for the place round which they were clustered was a low knoll on which stood the gallows. Robin shouldered his way into the crowd and soon came near the front, where he paused to ask what was going on. He was told that 3 young men had been caught killing deer in Sherwood, and as Prince John had left special instructions on his last visit to Nottingham that the forest laws were to be strictly enforced, all 3 of them were to be blinded with hot irons. "This is no public spectacle, but a cruel, unlawful wickedness," said Robin. "Aye, so it is so, good beggar," agreed a stout yeoman who stood beside him. "But the sheriff has proclaimed that this horror must be done in public, as a warning to other people. Are you free Englishmen, and will raise no hand to save these poor youths?" asked Robin. "There are 20 of the sheriff's guard, armed with swords," answered the yeoman sullenly. "Moreover, most of us are known men, and if we raised a hand, not only we, but our wives and children would suffer, and the youths have broken the law." Robin pushed his way right to the front. The crowd was crying shame upon the sheriff, Prince John, and all Normans, and pity and encouragement to the prisoners. Robin shouted louder than anyone else, but his words were of hatred to the 3 lawbreakers. Presently, a man in a leathern apron, obviously the executioner, strode past and drew a wicked-looking iron shaped like a tuning fork from a brazier, and after deciding that it was hot enough, started back again towards the prisoners. But by now the crowd had closed up even nearer. The executioners had almost to push his way. As he passed Robin, he tripped suddenly. Robin uttered a cry, lurched forward as if pushed from behind, and landed on the man's back. There was an awful yell, and the crowd drew away hastily as the captain of the guard strode forward with several of his men. Roughly they dragged Robin to his feet, and then the executioner. But the latter fell again, and writhed upon the ground, for the hot iron in his hand had burned a great red wound like the letter U on his face, and in falling, Robin had broken several of his ribs. "Your noble worships," whined Robin, "the crowd pushed me. I fell. I could not help it. Oh, do not punish a poor beggar. Spare me, I pray." "Hold him down and give him 20 strokes with a belt," ordered the captain. "Or stay. Fellow, you may go free if you perform the office of executioner in place of the man whom you have injured." "Right willingly, oh, right willingly, most noble sir," exclaimed Robin, while the crowd groaned and then cursed him. "Make haste, then," said the captain. "There will be trouble if we delay longer." "Let me first see that the villains are well bound," said Robin, and picking up the bow which he was using as a staff, he limped towards the gallows, to the base of which the 3 young men were lashed securely with thick ropes. Robin examined each in turn, bending low over them and fingering the knots. Then, leaving his staff behind, he limped back to the brazier, picking up the iron as he went. "As soon as this iron's white hot," he called out, "I'll see that the right man gets it in the face." The captain then stood forward and once more read out the charge against the 3 men, the law which they had broken, the punishment appointed, and Prince John's special charge as to its enforcement. Before he had finished, Robin took the iron out of the fire and carried it all glowing hot towards the gallows, while a low murmur of hate and loathing rippled around the crowd. Robin came to the foot of the gallows, raised the iron as if to press the points into the first man's eyes, and then he turned suddenly, straightened himself up, and hurled it with deadly accuracy into the face of the captain of the guard. There was a moment of petrified silence and stillness, broken only by the captain's yell of agony. During it, Robin flung off the beggar's coat, took up his bow, and had an arrow ready on the string as he cried in a ringing voice, "Free men of England, make way for Robin Hood and his 3 new followers." "Cut him down!" cried the captain, staggering to his feet. Robin's bowstring twanged, and the captain fell to the ground for the last time, an arrow in his heart. And even it seemed as the string twanged, there was another arrow waiting upon it. Meanwhile, the 3 prisoners had slipped their bonds, which Robin had untied while making pretense to secure them, and one of them leapt forward and snatched the sword and shield from the dead captain. Now the guards made as if to attack Robin, but his bowstring twanged twice, and 2 more men lay dead. For at that range, even chainmail could not withstand arrows sped by the surest hand that ever plucked bowstring. They hesitated, and while they did, 3 young men charged upon them where the line was thinnest, broke through, and in a moment were lost in the crowd. Robin loosed 1 more arrow, and then the crowd received him too. And although no force or defiance were used, the guards could only push through the throng slowly, while Robin and the men whom he had rescued passed out and away into Sherwood Forest as if the hillside had been empty. While all this was happening by Nottingham, Little John, dressed as a beggar and thirsting for revenge, was hastening through the forest path in search of his late adversary. He came up with him late in the afternoon in a little forest glade just off the high road. Here a fire had been lit, and round it sat 3 other beggars besides the man he was after, and one of these was deaf and dumb, one was blind, and one lacked a leg. "Good afternoon, my dear brethren," said Little John to the other 3. "Glad am I to come upon so many of my own kind. I hope you have had better fortune today in the begging trade than I have had." "Greetings, brother," said the lame man. "We have fared as well as we could hope, but yet we are beggars, even as yourself, with scarce a penny piece between us." "You have a villain and a traitor amongst you," said Little John, pointing to the beggar who was wearing his clothes. "That is no beggar, but a robber." "I am as true a beggar as the rest," shouted the first beggar, jumping to his feet, "and as well known as such from Berwick to Dover. It is this fellow who is a traitor and outlaw. Help me, good friends, and we'll string him up to the nearest tree." But Little John was so mad with rage that his first blow laid the beggar on the ground before him, and he proceeded to give him the best thrashing he had ever had in his life. Then he turned to the other 3 beggars, to find that they had drawn swords and knives and were about to attack him from behind. "Aha!" cried Little John. "More knaves to be beaten, are there?" With that, he knocked down the deaf and dumb beggar and beat him until he shouted for mercy. "A miracle!" laughed Little John. "The dumb speaks. Let me try whether the blind can see." He aimed a blow at the blind beggar, who had again come creeping up behind him with a long knife in his hand, and the fellow dodged the staff only to be knocked head over heels with a blow from the other end of it. Seeing this, the 1-legged beggar hastily let down his left leg, which was strapped up behind, and started to run away on 2 completely unmaimed limbs. "More miracles!" shouted Little John, and with a few strides he overtook this beggar also and brought him to the ground. Then, having disarmed all 4 and tied their hands firmly behind them, Little John retrieved his own clothes and changed them for the filthy old coats and hats. "I'll give up being a beggar," he said gravely. "My fortune has been so good today. Aha! I heard the gold ring when I thrashed each one of you." So saying, he ransacked the pockets, pouches, and bags of each beggar in turn, and counted out more than 300 pounds in gold, most of this being hidden among the meal in the great bag worn by the first beggar he and Robin had met. "A good harvest," said Little John. "I have threshed my sheaves to some purpose, and they have indeed yielded golden grain. Stay you all here, and mend your ways in future. I am off to make report to bold Robin Hood, who is indeed King of Sherwood." At the trysting tree in the secret glade, Little John found Robin and a great throng of the outlaws sitting down to supper round the great fires. "Greetings, good master," he cried gaily. "How fared you as a beggar?" Not better than I dare swear. For look, you, what have I got by my begging? 300 pounds in gold." And with that he told the tale of the 4 beggars, amid laughter and cheers. "I am glad that insolent rogue got him a good thrashing," said Robin, "for he was a low thief and no honest beggar. But my gains are greater than yours, Little John, for see, as a beggar, I won 3 men's lives, and here they are, 3 proper young men to draw a bow and strike a blow for freedom, for right, and for King Richard." All applauded this speech, and Little John was the first to admit that Robin had indeed proved the better beggar that day, and won a more valuable booty than any hoard of gold.